So I sent 10 songs through and they was all finna be on my album because I didn't want nobody to steal my shit because I know how people move. So boom, the one they took a liking to was the intro. Now the intro still dropped. I said, no, you can't have this song. He wanted me on his album still. He said, I'm gonna send you a verse through. Never sent a verse. I didn't give a fuck till I just went and listened to Iceman and I listened to Little Birdie and then I went back and listened to the intro on my first album. Twin. That's the only beat I've ever produced and sat there and produced. Don't rip my shit and repitch it like that, fam. That's fried. That's fried out and fucked up.
Drake allegedly took 1900Rugrat's beat, the only track he ever produced himself, the exact song he told Drake's camp they could not have, and dropped it on a major album like nobody would notice. Now that 1900Rugrat has spoken publicly, Drake has to respond. And let's be real, this ain't some standard industry dispute over credits or a publishing split. This is a 21-year-old kid from Limestone Creek, Florida, a town of barely 1,000 people who finally broke through, got the biggest cousin in the game, then watched that same artist allegedly reach into his bag, take the one song he specifically said no to, repitch it, and slide it onto Iceman like it belonged to him. What makes this bigger than just Drake and 1900Rugrat is the pattern documented, undeniable, and years deep. Taking flows, sounds, actual written bars from smaller artists and wearing them as his own. XXXTentacion said it. Meek Mill proved it. The Weeknd admitted it. Future's reference tracks leaked. Lil Yachty got brought up. And now on the very album Drake made to reclaim his legacy after getting buried by Kendrick Lamar, one of the first stories out of the gate is a Florida kid on Instagram saying that's mine. Before we get into what Drake allegedly did, you need to know who 1900Rugrat really is, because if you sleep on his story, you won't feel the weight of this. Miles Spiel, born August 8, 2003, Limestone Creek, Florida, Palm Beach County, barely 1,000 people. Never knew his biological parents, adopted at 2 weeks old, then kicked out by his adoptive parents at just 14. A teenager out on the streets of South Florida, moving in with his friend Rick from the Creek's family. He started rapping simply because he thought he could outdo a classmate freestyling in front of him, not chasing fame, just being himself. The class clown. The kid everyone slept on. For years he grinded in silence Walmart, Tijuana flats, never holding a job past 4 months. Recording on a Turtle Beach gaming headset in his boys' room, building his sound off Chief Keef, Kodak Black, YNW Melly, and XXXTentacion, the Florida legends who shaped everything he became. For years he was dropping freestyles on SoundCloud and barely getting plays. Then September 2024 hit 1900Rugrat dropped One Take Freestyle, and it went crazy. Within weeks, #1 on Spotify's US viral chart. Labels started calling immediately. He signed with Remain Solid and 300 Entertainment, and just like that, the man went from a porch in Limestone Creek to the 50th floor. Real Rags to Riches, which is exactly what he named his debut tape, Porch to the Pent, dropped February 28, 2025. The cousins flooded in fast. Kodak Black, Lil Yachty, Lil Uzi Vert posted him. Boss Man Dow took him on tour. He performed at Rolling Loud Miami and Rolling Loud California. The New York Times called his style fully formed. The Fader named him an artist to watch. And then came the one that changed everything. Drake himself reposted him. Right after Kendrick swept the Grammys with Not Like Us, Drake was in Australia on tour, posted an Instagram reel of himself on stage in a bullet hole hoodie with smoke effects, and 1900Rugrat's One Take Freestyle blasting in the background. Rugrat said he literally shook his girl awake when he saw it. To a 21-year-old kid from a town of 1,000 people, that cousin is everything. So imagine what it felt like when he put on Drake's new album and heard his own creation staring back at him. Now here's where it gets truly shocking, because before the cousin, before the Grammys moment, before any of this blew up, Drake's camp had already reached out to 1900Rugrat directly, not to compliment him, to acquire his music. Around a year and a half before Iceman dropped, one of Drake's producers hit up this then unknown Florida rapper asking for unreleased records. Rugrat sent them 10 songs, 10 unreleased tracks he had set aside for his own album. And he said it clearly on camera, "Keep this part in your memory because it's crucial." He knew how this industry moves. He wasn't naive. He was watching his back. And what happened next is exactly what he feared.
So I sent 10 songs through and they was all finna be on my album because I didn't want nobody to steal my shit because I know how people move.
Drake's team listened to all 10 tracks, and out of everything, the one they zeroed in on was the intro. The same beat that would go on to open Porch to the Pent. the only beat 1900 Rugrat ever made himself from scratch. And Rugrat said no, flat out. You can't have this song.
The one they took a liking to was the intro. Now the intro still dropped. I said, no, you can't have this song.
1900 Rugrat held on to it, protected it, and released it February 28, 2025 as the opening track of Porch to the Pent, the only beat he ever made himself from scratch, his creation. Then May 15, 2026 arrives. Drake doesn't drop one album. Not two, 3 albums simultaneously. Iceman Habibi made of honor 43 songs, all dropped at midnight during his Iceman livestream. He pulls out 3 hard drives on camera. The internet loses its mind. His biggest rollout in years. His first real statement since Kendrick Lamar buried him with Not Like Us. Everyone rushes to listen, and so does 1900 Rugrat. He gets a track 15 on Iceman, a song called Little Birdie, and something hits him immediately. He goes back, plays his own intro, plays Little Birdie again, and again. Then he gets on camera and says it straight, twin, that's the only beat I ever produced and sat there and made myself. Don't rip my shit and repitch it like that.
Till I just went and listened to Iceman, and I listened to Little Birdie, and then I went back and listened to the intro of my first album. Twin, that's the only beat I've ever produced and sat there and produced. Don't rip my shit and repitch it like that, fam.
Hear this clearly. 1900 Rugrat didn't say the beat sounded similar. He said that's the only beat he ever produced himself. Not a loop, not something he grabbed online. Built from scratch with his own hands. And he's saying Drake took it, repitched it, and placed it on Iceman, his so-called comeback album listed under Little Birdie, written and composed solely by Drake. No Rugrat credit, no co-production, nothing. The second that video dropped, the internet didn't walk, it ran. Music forums exploded. Reddit threads appeared within hours. TikTok timelines flooded with side-by-side comparisons. Fan accounts were clipping both songs back to back. And one sentence kept appearing everywhere: Little Birdie belongs to 1900 Rugrat and was used without his permission. And this wasn't some clout-chasing accusation from a nobody. This was a man with a documented paper trail, direct communication with Drake's production team, his own song released months before Iceman, and a timeline so airtight it speaks for itself. He made the beat. Drake's camp reached out and wanted it. He said no. Porch to the Pent dropped February 28, 2025. Little Birdie appeared on Iceman May 15, 2026. The dots don't just connect, they form a straight line. And once you see what happened next, you'll realize this wasn't the first time Drake found himself in this exact position. 1900 Rugrat grew up in Florida watching XXXTentacion blow up in his own state. He told Billboard he was a freshman in high school when Murder on My Mind was just a SoundCloud record. He watched what happened when X got big, and X had his own very specific situation with Drake. It's January 2017. Drake is on his Boy Meets World tour in Amsterdam and premieres a new track from More Life called KMT, featuring UK rapper Giggs. The track leaked through a fan recording, and within hours XXXTentacion and his fanbase were making noise because Look at Me had just become one of the biggest SoundCloud songs in the world. X was sitting in Broward County Jail at the time, South Florida, same universe as 1900 Rugrat, and the flow Drake was spitting on KMT sounded eerily, unmistakably similar to the exact cadence X had pioneered. X's team went public immediately. His manager Adam 22 admitted the similarities were hard to ignore. His associate Danny Towers went on record saying it was ridiculous to claim Drake had never heard of him. And X himself spoke to XXL directly from jail and said something that now sounds prophetic. If Drake is going to take the flow, at least reach out. Help out in this situation. Sound familiar? Because 1900 Rugrat's complaint carries that exact same energy you had access. You reached out, you asked for the music, I said no, and you did it anyway. But here's what makes the Rugrat situation actually more damning with X. The argument was about flow and cadence, harder to legally pin down. With Rugrat, we're allegedly talking about the actual beat, a produced instrumental, which carries a much clearer legal and ethical line. Drake's response to X back then. He went on BBC Radio 1 Extra, denied everything, played it off, and that was that. Because X was young, in jail, with no institutional support to push it further. Drake walked away without accountability. Now the question is, are we watching that same playbook run back in 2026? Because in June 2015, Meek Mill dropped a series of tweets that shook hip-hop to its core, accusing Drake of not writing his own raps and sparking the biggest ghostwriting controversy the genre had ever seen. Reference tracks surfaced. Audio recordings surfaced of an Atlanta rapper named Quentin Miller performing the exact same verses that ended up on Drake's songs, near identical delivery, near identical cadence, track after track. Reference recordings from 10 bands, Know Yourself, and other key Drake records had Miller's voice laying out the verses almost exactly the way Drake would later perform them. Drake's camp called Miller a collaborator, not a ghostwriter, but that distinction collapses the second you actually listen. As NPR pointed out at the time, the most important part of rap isn't just words on paper, it's the cadence, the flow, the melody, how a bar actually sounds. If someone else is performing all of that in a reference track, what exactly is left for the credited artist to do? That's the question Drake has never answered, and it didn't stop there. The Weeknd, back when he was broke and hungry, admitted to Rolling Stone in 2015 that he handed over songs intended for his own House of Balloons mixtape for Drake's Take Care, nearly half his album gone. He was grateful for the spotlight at the time, but years later when things soured between them, the real quote came out, "I thank God I never signed my life away." That's the trap nobody talks about enough. Artists around Drake give up music out of gratitude, out of pressure, out of hunger, and those songs end up on Drake records with minimal credit and zero public conversation. Then Future's reference tracks leaked during the 2024 beef era. Rick Ross trolled Drake by posting a video captioned, "Yachty Aka the Pen," and reference tracks started surfacing with Lil Yachty's voice laying out the cadence, the delivery, the entire blueprint on verses that became Drake records. So when 1900Rugrat's steps to the camera and says Drake took his beat after being told no, that accusation doesn't land in a vacuum. It lands on top of a decade's worth of situations the culture has been quietly cataloging. This ain't a one-off. This is another chapter in a very long book. And the timing couldn't be more devastating because Iceman was supposed to be Drake's comeback after Kendrick Lamar bodied him with Not Like Us in May 2024. A song that went on to win Record of the Year and Song of the Year at the 2026 Grammys, the first diss track in history to win a Grammy, and was performed live to 133.5 million viewers at the Super Bowl halftime show. Drake had never been in this position before. His lawsuit against UMG got dismissed in October 2025. The judge ruled the lyrics were non-actionable opinion. So legally, Kendrick walked. Culturally, Kendrick walked. The whole world had witnessed it. Drake had to respond, and he did it the only way he knows how: big, loud, and overwhelming. 3 albums simultaneously, 43 songs, music videos premiering during a live stream, an ice sculpture causing safety concerns in Toronto, months of teasers building up to it. The Iceman rollout was supposed to be a coronation, his reclamation, proof that regardless of 2024, he was still standing, still the biggest. But within hours of release, the first major story circulating wasn't about diss tracks aimed at Kendrick or LeBron James or DJ Khaled. It was 1900Rugrat on Instagram saying, "You stole my intro and I told you couldn't have it." On what should have been Drake's biggest day of the year, that's a PR disaster. And think about what this looks like from Rugrat's side. Drake cossined him, posted him. Put his music behind the most symbolic moment of his entire post-beef tour, standing on that stage in a bullet hole hoodie, smoke pouring out, Rugrat's voice echoing through the arena as a symbol of defiance and resilience. He used Rugrat's music to represent his own strength, and then allegedly turned around and took that same artist's music without compensation, without credit, without permission. That's not a business dispute. That's a betrayal from the person Rugrat showed the most love to at his lowest point. Now here's what everyone is waiting on as of this recording. Drake has not said a single word publicly about 1900Rugrat's claims. No Instagram story, no tweet, no subliminal, nothing. And that silence is loud, because Drake's options are limited and every one of them is uncomfortable. He can deny it, but the documented outreach from his production team and the audio similarities make denial a dangerous gamble. He can credit Rugrat retroactively, but that's an admission the credit was missing when it mattered. He can settle quietly behind the scenes, the most likely outcome if lawyers are already involved, which could legally silence Rugrat from ever speaking on it again. Or he can ignore it entirely, the same move he arguably pulled with XXXTentacion in 2017. But the internet in 2026 is nothing like 2017. Documentation lives forever. Side-by-side comparisons get clipped, saved, and reshared indefinitely. Every person who remembers Drake posting Rugrat's music is now holding that moment up as evidence of a pattern, and the longer Drake stays silent, the louder that conversation gets. What we know for certain is this 1900Rugrat ain't backing down. He didn't frame this as a question. Didn't say he thought it sounded similar. He said it point blank, "That's the only beat I ever produced and sat there and made myself. Don't rip my shit and repitch it like that." That's not an accusation. That's a declaration from a man who knows exactly what his creation sounds like and isn't entertaining a single gray area. And Rugrat has something most people who have come at Drake before didn't have: a fast-growing fan base, a real label behind him, and an authenticity-first reputation in the Florida rap scene that makes people believe him instantly. He's not some unknown chasing clout. He's a 21-year-old who built his entire brand on being real and unfiltered. Crying wolf would destroy everything he stands for. Zoom out for a second, because this situation is bigger than Drake and bigger than 1900 Rugrat. What we're really watching is a conversation about power in the music industry that hip-hop has been having for decades without resolution. When you're the biggest artist in the game, smaller artists get pulled into your orbit. They share unreleased music. They're grateful for the exposure, the casa, and the repost. And in that gratitude, they sometimes lose their creations to the machine. That's not new. What is new is the ability to document it, expose it, and demand accountability in real time. XXXTentacion didn't have that in 2017. He was literally in jail, no platform, no backing, no legal resources to pursue it further. The comparison boosted his profile and became part of his legend, but justice, that was a completely different conversation. 1900 Rugrat is in a different position than anyone who's challenged Drake before. Real label behind him, documented paper trail of direct communication with Drake's camp, the original beat he made himself, and the self-awareness to know that silence means acceptance. Here's the real tea: Drake's entire brand runs on authenticity. The confessional bars, the personal storytelling, the idea that he creates from a genuine place. But every allegation from Meek Mill in 2015 to 1900 Rugrat in 2026 chips away at that foundation. Not enough to collapse it, but enough to permanently shift how the culture reads him. And now on the album he made specifically to restore his reputation, one of the most talked about tracks out of 43 is being claimed by a 21-year-old from Limestone Creek, Florida, who just wanted his intro back. What Rugrat described: the direct communication, the request, the refusal, the alleged use anyway, is not how someone who respects the culture moves. That's how someone who expects power to erase problems moves. And here's what makes this truly shocking: Drake is in the most vulnerable position of his entire career. Trying to win back a culture that watched Kendrick Lamar perform Not Like Us at the Super Bowl. Trying to prove he creates without controversy, without legal battles, without the artificiality cloud that's followed him since Meek opened that box in 2015. Instead of walking out of the Iceman rollout clean, he's walking out with a 21-year-old Florida rapper pointing at his album saying, "Don't rip my shit." How Drake responds to this, or whether he responds at all, will define where he stands right now as an artist and as a man. Go listen to both songs back to back right now and drop your verdict in the comments below. You'll know exactly what you're hearing. If you've been watching Drake's pattern since the XXXTentacion era and you're done with the culture staying quiet about it, smash that like button. Because accountability only happens when people refuse to look away. I'm out. Stay dangerous.